Before we dive into the story, don't forget to like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from.
Northern New Mexico Territory, December 1882. The snow was ankle-deep by late afternoon, but the sky above the ridgeline still showed no sign of letting up. Gray light filtered down across the valley. There were no birds in the trees, no sound from the hills. Just the wind, always the wind, crawling down through the pines and across the open ground like it had work to do. Taya moved slow. She couldn't feel her feet anymore. The frost had numbed them past pain. She didn't know how many hours she'd been walking. Since sunrise, maybe longer. Her legs didn't hurt now. That part was worse. It meant they were starting to give out. She was 25, but her body had been through more than most twice her age. Her dress, once decorated with beads and fringe, was torn above the knee, wet from snow and dirt. Her long black hair clung to her neck, strands frozen stiff. Her arms were pulled in over her chest as tight as they could go. Not for modesty, just to hold what warmth she had left. She couldn't afford shame anymore, or hesitation, or pride. Every time she blinked, her vision swam. Her throat was dry. Her lips had cracked 2 days ago and were bleeding by the time she lost the river trail. The last place she'd slept was under an overhang of rock with pine branches packed around her. That had been she didn't know when. 2 nights ago. 3? Before that, she'd escaped from the wagon convoy, moving through the high pass. She hadn't waited to figure out if anyone noticed. She'd climbed down through the rocks in the dark with nothing but her torn clothes and whatever strength she had left. And now, she was at the end of it. Her body swayed and buckled. She caught herself once, twice, then dropped to one knee. She wasn't praying. She wasn't thinking. She was collapsing. But then, something would smoke. Faint but real. Her eyes lifted, squinting into the white blur of the wind. Past the trees, down a small slope, there was a barn, weather-worn, half covered in snow, and just beyond it, a cabin. She couldn't tell if the place was abandoned, but there was smoke coming from the chimney, thin but steady. The shape of a horse stood half-hidden behind a barn fence. Someone lived there. She pushed herself forward. Her bare feet scraped the snow and left no blood. There was nothing left to bleed. She got within 10 feet of the barn before her legs gave out again. This time, she didn't catch herself. She fell flat, her shoulder hitting the drift hard, her face turned to the side. Her eyes stayed open for a second, then closed, and the cold rolled in around her. Inside the cabin, Gideon Hale didn't hear the fall. He was standing near the stove, waiting on the coffee to finish. He'd cut firewood all morning, loaded some of it into the lean-to out back. His leg ached bad today, left side just below the knee. An old cavalry wound that flared in the cold. He didn't take laudanum for it. Didn't trust what dulled the senses. He wasn't a big man for talking, or thinking if he could help it. These days, it was easier just to keep moving. He kept a routine: wake, feed the horse, gather wood, heat the cabin, check the traps, eat, sleep, repeat. He was 38. Lived here 5 winters now. Lost his wife, pregnant, fever, gone in a week, 6 winters ago. After that, he left the post, cashed out what little pay was owed to him, and took a patch of land near the tree line where no one came calling. He liked it that way. He poured the coffee and stood for a moment at the window. The snow was thicker now, still falling sideways. He took a sip, let the warmth sit in his chest. Then he saw something move by the barn. Not much, just a flicker, like something fell. He set the cup down and reached for his coat and boots. He took the rifle, but didn't chamber around. That kind of reflex had worn off years ago. He stepped out into the cold and pulled the coat tighter. The snow hit him fast, wind straight in the face. He walked stiff, favoring the bad leg. As he rounded the barn, he saw her. Small, curled tight, skin blue around the edges. Black hair frozen to her cheeks. Torn dress, no shoes. She was face down. Her fingers were clawed up, palms buried in the snow. He dropped to one knee, didn't speak, didn't check her neck for marks, just leaned close and watched her chest. Still moving. He moved fast after that. Not panicked, just practiced. He stripped off the coat and wrapped it around her torso, then lifted her. She didn't weigh more than 100 pounds. Her head lolled against his shoulder, dead weight. She didn't speak, didn't flinch. She was half gone already. Inside, the cabin was warm but not hot. He laid her on the bed, pulled the blankets up tight over her, moved the fire grate aside, and threw in more wood. Stoked it hot, fast. She didn't move, not even a twitch. He filled a tin pot with water, added some of the dried meat and ground barley, let simmer low. She didn't wake. He didn't try to wake her. He just sat across from her in the chair, near the fire, elbows on his knees, eyes on her breathing. Long, slow, shallow. It was hours before her eyes opened. Late evening. Snow still hit the windows in hard bursts. Her body flinched once beneath the covers. Her hand shot to her chest, then her throat. Her eyes flicked around the room, quick, confused, wild. Then they landed on him. She sat up halfway, then dropped again, too weak. Gideon didn't move. He stayed where he was, hands relaxed, not close to anything threatening. He watched her, not like a man watching a woman, but like a man watching something alive that could still bolt or die. Her voice didn't come, so he nodded once, calm. He reached beside him to the small table and lifted a tin cup. He placed it beside her, just within reach. Steam lifted from it. "Drink," he said, quiet. Nothing else. Then he leaned back and stayed there. She didn't move for a long time. Her hands eventually came out from under the covers. She was shaking. She touched the cup, then pulled it close. Brought it to her lips. Sniffed. Tasted. Swallowed. She drank half, then set it down without a word. Their eyes met once more. He didn't ask her name. She didn't ask where she was. And neither of them said anything after that. Outside, the snow continued to fall. Inside, a fire burned and two strangers sat breathing in the quiet. The only thing between them was silence. But for now, that was enough. The fire had burned low by dawn, but the room still held its warmth. Gideon was up before first light, same as always. He sat on the edge of the stool near the stove, pulling on his boots one at a time. His coat hung by the door. The fire crackled soft behind him as he reached for the kettle and set it back on the grate. No need to make noise. He moved like someone who knew how to keep quiet. He glanced toward the bed. She was still asleep, still curled toward the wall, face half hidden beneath the blanket, black hair spread out across the pillow. Her breathing was stronger now, slower and more even than the night before. He stood and limped toward the window. The storm hadn't stopped completely, but it had settled. A lighter snow fell now, soft and steady. The wind was calmer. It'd be cold all day, but workable. He needed to check on the horse. Feed it. Break the ice in the trough. He looked at her one last time before stepping outside. The door opened and closed with barely a sound. Taya's eyes opened the moment he left. She hadn't really been sleeping. She drifted in and out all night, each noise snapping her halfway awake. Her muscles hurt. Her fingers ached. But she was alive. She kept her eyes on the ceiling as her mind worked. Where was she? What did he want? Why hadn't he taken anything? She pulled the blanket up tighter under her chin and turned her head slowly. The room was small but clean. A stove, a table, two chairs, some hooks along the wall holding coats and tools. A rifle leaned in the corner. Another by the door. Nothing was out of place. Nothing looked hidden. Just a man's home. Her gaze moved to the tin cup from the night before. Still half full. Still warm. She reached for it, drank the rest. Then slowly, carefully, she sat up. Her legs dangled over the side of the bed. Her feet hurt even before they touched the floor. She pressed them down anyway. The wood was cold, but not like outside. Not enough to stop her. She stood. Her legs wobbled beneath her weight. She steadied herself with one hand on the table, then took one step, then another. She moved slow but deliberate. She didn't know what she was doing, maybe testing the strength in her legs, maybe just making sure she still could. A noise outside made her freeze. She turned toward the window. The curtain was thin. She could see his shape outside. The man, splitting wood now, near the barn, moving slow, favoring one leg. She watched him for a long moment, not because she was curious, but because she didn't understand him yet. He hadn't tied her down, hadn't locked the door, hadn't even searched her. Men who took women didn't behave like that. She stepped back from the window, picked up the empty cup, set it neatly on the table. Then she saw her dress, still wet, still ripped, hanging by the fire. Folded neatly beside it was something else. a flannel shirt, one of his, clean, and a pair of thick socks. She stared at them without moving. She didn't ask for them. He hadn't offered them, but he placed them there anyway. She didn't know what it meant yet. She didn't trust it, but she picked up the shirt, held it for a second in both hands, then slowly pulled it over her arms. It hung loose, smelled of smoke and dry pine. It covered her better than the torn dress had. She sat back down on the bed, silent, and waited. Gideon came in carrying a small load of chopped wood and a bucket of half-frozen water. He saw her sitting up, watching him. He didn't speak. She didn't speak either. He set the wood down, poured water into the pot, then placed it on the stove. Steam started to rise again. "I fed the horse," he said simply, without looking at her. "You can stay till the storm clears." She didn't answer. Her eyes stayed on him, trying to read more than he was giving. He walked over to the wall and hung his coat back on the hook. Sat down in the chair near the stove. Rubbed his hands once, then looked at her. "You cold?" She paused, then gave a single, slight nod. He stood again, walked over to the trunk near the back wall, opened it, and pulled out another blanket. Brought it to her, held it out, but didn't place it on her. Just offered. She took it slowly, wrapped it around her shoulders. Still no words. He didn't push. He turned back to the stove, pulled a small iron pan from the shelf, and began cracking eggs into it. He moved slowly, with a limp, careful not to make unnecessary noise. She watched him cook. The food smelled like something from a different world. He placed a plate on the table a few minutes later, set it down without a word, then stepped back. She looked at it, then looked at him. He didn't sit, didn't eat. She picked up the fork, took one bite. He nodded once, then sat back down, still watching the fire. They didn't speak the rest of the morning. She finished the food, slowly, carefully, then placed the fork down on the plate and covered it with the napkin. He noticed. She didn't thank him. He didn't expect it. And for the next hour, they sat there in silence. Two people from different worlds, stitched into the same cold morning, listening to the wind scratch against the window and the stove hiss softly as the pot simmered. Neither trusted the other yet, but neither moved away either. They stayed, and that was something. The storm moved east by midday. The sky was still gray, but the snow had slowed to a drift. No longer fierce, just steady and soft, piling high along the fence line. The wind had quieted too, but the cold hadn't lifted. It pressed in against the windows, seeped into the floorboards, lingered in the air like it belonged there. Inside the cabin, Gideon sat by the window, lacing his boots. He'd added another log to the fire an hour earlier and res-tacked the kindling by the stove. The cabin was warm, but not comfortable. He didn't aim for comfort, just survival. He stood slowly, stretching out the bad leg before putting weight on it. Then he popped, but he didn't grimace, just rolled his shoulders and moved to the corner where his coat hung. Behind him, he heard her shift on the bed. She hadn't spoken since last night, not even a whisper, but she'd eaten, drank water, taken the blanket he offered. And now, she stood too. He didn't turn around right away. He wanted to give her space, let her decide her own next step. When he did look, he found her wrapped in the second blanket, one hand pressed against the wall for balance. Her dark eyes flicked to his, then to the coat, then to the fire. She didn't ask anything. He walked to the door and pulled it open halfway. "I'm checking the fence," he said. Still no reply. "I won't be long." Then he stepped outside. Taya stood in place long after the door shut. She listened to the wind, to the sound of his boots crunching the snow as he moved past the barn. Then she exhaled, long and slow, and let her shoulders drop slightly. She didn't owe this man trust. Not yet. But he hadn't lied, hadn't touched her, hadn't locked the door behind him. She limped toward the fire. Her legs still ached, her feet swollen and red from cold damage. But she could stand. She could move. She could do something. She looked around the cabin, careful and quiet. Everything had a place. Nothing was messy, nothing excessive. A single tin cup sat in the basin. A stack of firewood along the wall. The rifle still leaning in the corner, untouched. She found a rag on the hook near the table, dampened it with warm water from the kettle, and wiped the surface of the table where she'd eaten. Slow, small motions. Not for him. For her. She folded the rag again and placed it back. then looked down at the plate from breakfast, still sitting near the edge of the stove, untouched since she'd finished. She picked it up. There was no hesitation in her hands now, just quiet, practiced motion. She washed the plate, set it to dry. Then she returned to the bed and sat, not because she was weak, but because her feet still throbbed, and because she wasn't sure what else to do. Gideon returned 20 minutes later, shoulders dusted with snow. He stomped his boots once before coming inside, then shut the door with the heel of his hand. His eyes scanned the room out of habit. He saw the wiped table, the plate drying on the rack, the rag folded neatly where it belonged. He didn't say anything. He looked at her, and she didn't drop her gaze this time. "Fence is good," he said. Horse didn't spook. She gave the faintest nod. "You walking better?" Another nod. He moved toward the stove, took the kettle off the flame, poured a small amount into the tin mug. The water steamed faintly. "You sore?" She didn't answer. "Need salve for your feet?" he asked, finally meeting her eyes. There was hesitation now. Not fear, just calculation. Then quietly, yes. It was the first word she'd spoken. He nodded once. Didn't react. Didn't praise her. Just turned toward the shelf near the window, opened a wooden box, and pulled out a small tin. He placed it on the table near her and stepped back. She reached for it carefully. He didn't watch her use it. Instead, he returned to the fire and added another log. The cabin filled with the sound of wood crackling. Neither of them spoke for a while. Later, near dusk, she stood and walked slowly to the side window. Outside, the ridge lay quiet. The sky was heavy with cloud, but the wind had died. She didn't speak, but he noticed her looking. "You can go," he said from his chair, voice even. "If you want to. Roads won't be good." But the storms passed. She didn't turn around. She kept her eyes on the hills. Then she said low, "Nowhere to go." He didn't ask why. Didn't push. Instead, he nodded once. "Stay as long as you need." Then he stood, walked over to the pot, and stirred it. "Dinner'll be ready soon." She sat back down in the same place as before, hands folded in her lap, shoulders looser now, legs tucked under the blanket again, still guarded, but present. He set the bowl in front of her again, same as yesterday. She took it without hesitation. He poured one for himself. This time, they ate at the table together. No words, just breath, spoon, steam, and the shared weight of quiet that didn't feel as heavy as before. The wind stayed quiet the next day, but the cold didn't lift. A hard frost had settled across the ground, making the snow crisp and dry. Everything outside the cabin was still. The fence line, the slope behind the barn, the pale ridge in the distance. It looked safe, but Gideon didn't trust it. In winter, things could look still and turn cruel in an hour. He stood near the stove, finishing his coffee. He hadn't spoken yet. Neither had she. That had become their pattern. Wake, check the fire, sit, move only when needed. Taya sat across the room, arms folded around herself, still wrapped in the thick flannel shirt. The blanket lay loose over her lap. She looked stronger this morning. Not warm, but not shivering. Her feet were covered now, socks too big for her but dry. The swelling had gone down. Gideon didn't ask how she slept. She didn't ask what he planned to do today. Instead, he reached for his coat. "I'm bringing in wood," he said, pulling the door open. She watched him go. He moved slower today. His leg ached more than usual, likely from standing too long at the stove last night. He ignored it, carried a load of firewood from the lean-to to the porch, dumped it in the bin, and returned for more. After 3 trips, he paused to breathe, resting one hand on the side of the barn. When he came back the 4th time, she was standing outside the door. He stopped. Taya didn't look at him directly. She stepped past him toward the stacked wood, bent at the knees, and picked up 2 smaller pieces. She held them tight against her chest, turned, and walked back toward the cabin. He didn't stop her. He followed. Inside, she placed the wood neatly beside the stove, then turned and walked back out without a word. He watched her. He let her. They made 6 trips together. No one spoke. She took only what she could carry, smaller pieces, lighter ones. He took the rest. Neither rushed. Neither hesitated. He watched her movements out of the corner of his eye, how she leaned in her knees to balance, how she looked at the ground as she stepped, never straying far from his line of sight. By the time the bin was full, Her breath was clouding heavy in the air. He shut the door behind them and rubbed his hands together near the fire. She stood near the table, catching her breath. Then she moved toward the kettle. Carefully, she picked up the tin cup, filled it halfway, then carried it across the room and placed it down near his chair. He looked at it, then at her. She didn't say anything. He nodded, then took the cup. That was their first real exchange. Midday passed quietly. She cleaned the table again after they ate, using the same damp cloth. He watched her fold it afterward, same as the day before. Only this time, she didn't glance at him as she did it. She just did it, as if the motion belonged to her now. Later, she moved to the corner and sat on the floor, her back against the wall near the stove. She pulled the blanket around her legs and leaned her head gently back. Not to sleep, just to be still. He sat across from her, his own back to the opposite wall. He had a small piece of leather in his hands, working it slowly with a needle and thread, fixing a tear in the side of his glove. She watched quietly. He noticed but didn't speak. She didn't ask what he was making, but her eyes stayed on his hands. When he finished the last stitch, he set the glove aside, then looked up and met her eyes. "You sew?" She didn't answer right away, then gave a single nod. He motioned toward the basket on the shelf behind her. "Threads in there." She looked at the basket, then at him. She didn't move. Not yet, but her head dipped again. That was enough. The light dimmed outside. The fire burned steady inside. Neither of them had said more than 5 words between them since morning, but they had moved around each other now, worked in the same space, taken turns by the stove, sat in the same silence without shrinking from it. And when dinner came, he handed her the bowl without stepping back this time. She took it without lowering her eyes. They sat at the table. She ate slower tonight, not because she was tired, but because she wasn't rushing anymore. Gideon watched her hands move, steady and calm. No more shaking, no more flinching, just routine, and he found himself breathing easier. They didn't smile. They didn't talk, but the distance between them had changed. It wasn't gone, but it was smaller now. The cold held through the next morning. A harder kind of cold, sharp in the lungs, the kind that stuck even after the fire had burned for hours. Gideon had already checked the snare line once before sunup, but he needed to reset 2 of them. A fox had taken the bait on one. The other had snapped empty. That happened sometimes. Snow threw off the scent, or the metal froze stiff. He sat on the stool, pulling on his boots, laces tight. Across the room, Taya stood near the stove, folding the shirt he'd given her. She'd mended the side seam where the thread had pulled loose. The patch was small even. She didn't ask before fixing it, just did it. She placed the folded shirt on the table, then turned back toward the fire. Gideon stood. "I'll check the traps again," he said. "Might be gone an hour." She nodded without looking at him. He grabbed the rifle, slung it over his shoulder, reached for the coat, then paused at the door. "If I'm not back by midday, stay inside. Don't open for anyone." This time, her eyes lifted. She gave another small nod. He closed the door behind him and stepped into the snow. The quiet returned the moment he left. Taya didn't sit. She moved slow but sure now. Her strength was coming back, bit by bit. The socks he gave her were still thick enough to let her walk the floor without wincing. The fire crackled steady. She stirred the coals, added a small log, kept the heat even, then turned to the table. There was a pile of clothing near the wall. A torn scarf, a pair of worn gloves with fraying stitches, a blanket with the edge unraveling. She picked up the scarf and sat. Her hands worked like they remembered. Back home, she'd done this often. Repairing things took care. Quiet hands. It gave her something to focus on, something to control. Time passed without her noticing. She mended the scarf first, then the blanket edge, then moved to the gloves. The wind outside shifted suddenly. She stood, crossed the room, looked through the side window. Nothing, just snow and pines and a pale stretch of sky. She stepped back, slowly, and returned to the table. The fire hissed behind her. Midday came. Still no sign of him. She stood again. This time, she walked to the door, opened it. Cold, rushed and hard, and she gritted her teeth against it. Her fingers clenched the edge of the doorframe as she looked toward the woods. No figure. No footprints fresh enough to follow. Just the trees. She hesitated. Her weight shifted forward like she might step out. Then she stopped. He'd told her to stay. She closed the door, barred it, then paced once across the room, back to the window. It was nearly another hour before she saw him. A dark shape emerging from the line of trees, limping worse than usual. Rifle across his back, something wrapped in hide, slung over one shoulder. She opened the door before he reached it. He blinked once at the sight of her standing there. "You all right?" she asked, voice low, steady. He looked at her for a long moment, then gave a tired nod. Just took longer. One snare was tangled, slipped on the hill. She stepped back and let him in. He moved slow, boot heels heavy on the wood. She took the bundle from his shoulder without asking, carried it to the table. It was a hair caught clean, already bled. He pulled off his coat and leaned against the wall, catching his breath. "You didn't go out?" She shook her head. "Stayed inside. Like you said." He nodded, then looked at the scarf, gloves, and blanket folded on the bench. "You did all that?" She gave a small nod. "I had time." He didn't speak for a beat. Then, quietly, "Thank you." She didn't answer. Didn't need to. That night, they ate rabbit stew in silence. But it wasn't the same silence anymore. It wasn't tension. It wasn't mistrust. It was space shared by two people who were beginning to understand the shape of each other's presence. He handed her the last slice of bread without a word. She took it without looking down. Their hands touched briefly. He didn't pull away, and she didn't flinch. The air inside the cabin was still, the kind of stillness that came after hard work and long silence. The fire had burned down to red coals. The pot above it gave off a soft hiss now and then, but otherwise there was nothing. No sound from outside. No wind. No snow hitting the roof. Just quiet. Taya sat on the floor near the hearth, knees drawn up, a quilt folded around her legs. Her hands were idle. For the first time in days, she had nothing left to fix. No seams to repair. No clothes to patch. She'd checked the buttons on his coat twice, not because they were loose, but because she needed something to do with her fingers. Gideon sat in the chair nearby, elbows resting on his thighs, hands clasped together. He'd stripped off his coat and gloves, his shirt sleeves rolled to the forearms. His right hand flexed now and then, old tension in the fingers from when he broke them years ago, never healed right. His gaze was steady on the fire, but his thoughts were elsewhere. They had spent most of the day in the same room, not avoiding each other, not talking either. The quiet had changed over the last few days, less like a wall, more like a shared place neither wanted to leave. She finally spoke. "Your leg," she said softly. His head turned. "What about it?" "You limp worse when it's cold." He paused, surprised, maybe that she noticed, or maybe just that she said anything. "Yeah," he answered. "Old break. Union cavalry. Shattered below the knee. They wanted to cut it, but I told them no." She nodded, not out of sympathy, just acknowledgement. He waited a beat, then added, "Aches like hell in snow." She looked back toward the fire. They were both facing it now, their bodies angled slightly inward, but not enough to feel close. "Not yet." After a while, she asked, "Your wife?" He glanced at her. Her eyes didn't shift. Her tone wasn't pushing. He answered, "Fever took her. Spring 5 years ago. She was carrying our first." The words hung in the space between them, simple, final. There was no tremor in his voice. No break. He had said it before, just not often. Taya didn't respond. Not right away. Then, "I was taken from my village. Sold to men traveling east. Before that, I lived near the Red Hills beyond the river bend." Her voice was flat, factual. She wasn't offering the story for comfort, just equality. He didn't ask for more. She didn't give more. They sat like that for a long time. Still, breathing. Gideon stood first, walked to the stove and stirred the pot, then poured half into a tin bowl and set it in front of her. He poured the rest for himself. She didn't wait for him to sit. She picked up the spoon and ate. This time, when he sat down, it was closer. Just a foot or two away, still on the floor, just to the side of where she sat. Not enough to crowd her. Not enough to be careless. But closer than before. She noticed, but didn't move. After the meal, she stood and cleaned both bowls without being asked. He folded the quilt and placed it over the chair she'd used before. Then he sat down again, not far from the spot she usually took. She looked at him from across the room, then walked over. She didn't sit on the chair. She sat on the floor again, near the fire. But this time, she chose to sit just beside him, not touching, not leaning, but close enough that he could hear her breath, close enough that she could feel the heat coming off his arm. They said nothing. They didn't have to. And when he reached over and adjusted the log in the fire, she handed him the iron poker without being asked. That was their language now. Action, choice, presence. That night, she didn't sleep immediately. She stayed by the fire long after he'd settled into the bed. And when she finally lay down on the floor near the hearth, she didn't wrap herself as tightly in the quilt as before, because she didn't feel watched, and she didn't feel alone. She felt seen and safe, not claimed, just kept. The snow had stopped completely by morning. The sky outside was pale, washed in white light, the kind that made shadows soft and edges vanish. But the cold stayed sharp. Inside the cabin, the fire was strong. The air held a faint smell of cooked rabbit and cedarwood. Taya sat at the table, sorting through the last of the dry herbs she'd found on the shelf. Bundles of pine, dried yarrow, a tin of crushed willow bark. None of it was labeled. She touched each by smell and texture, sorting them into small piles. Her fingers worked steady, clean, methodical. Gideon stood at the far end of the room, knife in one hand, the other holding a strip of leather he was cutting into lashings. His coat lay draped over a chair, shirt sleeves rolled again. He had just finished the third tie when the blade slipped. It was small, fast, but deep enough. He hissed through his teeth, dropped the knife, and gripped his palm. Taya looked up, saw the blood running between his fingers. He stood still for a second, head bowed, jaw tight. Then he reached for the cloth on the table to press into his hand. "Let me," she said. It came out quiet, not commanding. He didn't argue. He sat down, blood dripping into his other palm, and held the hand out. She moved across the room without rushing, grabbed the basin from the corner, filled it with warm water from the kettle, and brought it over. He didn't flinch as she cleaned it, didn't speak. She wrapped a cloth around his hand, firm but not rough, then went to the shelf and brought back the tin he'd used on her feet days earlier. Opened it, dipped her fingers in, and dabbed it gently across the wound before binding it again with a strip of clean linen. Her touch was light, efficient, but her hand stayed on his longer than necessary. He noticed. She did too, but neither spoke of it. When she tied off the final knot, she sat back, not far. He looked at the bandage, then at her. "Where'd you learn that?" She didn't look up. "My mother." He nodded once. "You're good at it." She lifted her eyes now. "You are bad at knives." He huffed through his nose, almost a laugh, but not quite. His mouth twitched. A corner turned upward. "Sometimes." They sat like that for a beat longer. Then she reached for the basin, took it to the stove, and emptied it. He flexed his bandaged hand slowly. Didn't say it, but he didn't need to. He trusted her hands now, not just with the wound, with his stillness, with the room, with the quiet. Later that afternoon, she found the sewing basket again and began reinforcing the cuffs of his spare shirt. She didn't ask, just did it. Needles smooth between her fingers, eyes steady, shoulders relaxed. He watched her from the chair. She looked different today, still guarded, still alert, but she moved like she belonged inside the space now. Not hiding, not waiting, present. He didn't tell her that. He just rose from the chair and placed a half-cut apple near her hand. No plate, no words, just a gesture. She took it without hesitation, bit in, chewed, passed the other half back to him. Their fingers touched again. This time, neither moved away. That night, she didn't sleep on the floor. She didn't ask, and he didn't offer. But when the fire burned low and she stood from the corner, blanket in her arms, she looked at the bed, then at him. He met her eyes, said nothing, shifted over, pulling the quilt back on one side. She lay down, fully clothed, back to him, not touching, still cautious, still unsure, but not afraid. And when he reached out after the light was gone and gently covered her shoulder with the edge of the quilt, she didn't flinch. She closed her eyes. The space between them was still wide, but it was no longer empty. The air was clear when Gideon woke. No wind, no snow, just the quiet hum of a cold morning pressing against the windows and the steady sound of wood cracking in the stove. The cabin was still warm. but the bed beside him was empty. His eyes opened fully. The quilt was pulled back neatly. No sound of water in the basin. No movement near the fire. He sat up slowly, letting the stiffness in his leg pass before standing. His boots were still by the door, untouched. The rifle still leaned in the corner. The table was empty. The door, latched from the inside, hadn't been opened since last night. But she wasn't there. His heart thumped harder than it should have. He reached for the coat and yanked it on in one motion, slipping the rifle strap over his shoulder. He stepped outside in his socks, boots forgotten, the snow biting hard into his soles. He scanned the yard. Nothing near the fence. Nothing at the trap line. The barn door was half open. He limped toward it fast. Taya stood just inside, crouched near the feed barrel. She was tossing handfuls of oats into the trough, soft and careful, so the horse wouldn't spook. She wore his second coat, sleeves rolled at the wrists, her hair braided down the side, a scarf pulled up over her mouth against the chill. She didn't hear him at first, not until he stopped at the threshold, breath heavy in the cold air. She turned, startled. Their eyes met. Then she stood slowly, dusting her hands off. "I woke early," she said. "Didn't want to wake you." He needed feed. Her voice was steady. No jump, no apology, just truth. Gideon didn't move for a long second. Then, voice low, "Next time, tell me." She nodded. "I didn't mean to worry you," she added, after a pause. He looked at her harder now, not with anger, with something closer to disbelief. "You could have been gone. I wasn't. You could have been." Another pause. She stepped closer. "I didn't go far. You didn't say anything. You don't either, most days." That hit somewhere real. He looked down, jaw tight, then back at her. "I've lost too many things I didn't say goodbye to," he said. The words came out flat. No drama, but heavy. Taya's face softened, and she stepped closer still. Her hand reached for the edge of his coat. Not to pull him in, not to touch skin, just to place her fingers near the side of his arm. "I'm still here," she said. He didn't answer, but he didn't pull away. They walked back to the cabin together. He opened the door for her. She stepped in first. He latched it behind them. She poured water into the kettle. He added another log to the fire. Their movements mirrored each other, quiet, steady. She turned toward him once more. "I can help now," she said. "You don't have to do everything alone." He nodded, then sat at the table. "You've stayed longer than you planned." "I didn't plan anything." Still, she met his eyes. "I didn't stay because I owed you," she said. "I stayed because I wanted to." That was the first time she'd spoken of choice. He heard it, felt it, then nodded once. "Then you stay." That night, she didn't take the outside edge of the bed. She lay in the center, head turned toward him. And when he shifted under the quilt, their arms brushed. She didn't pull away. Neither did he. The first melt came slow. Patches of brown earth showed through the snow near the south side of the barn, where the sun hit longer. Water dripped steady from the edge of the roof. The sky was wide and open, pale blue with only a few high clouds. Birds returned first, just two of them, but their calls cut through the quiet like something new. Inside the cabin, the air felt different. Not warmer, not yet, just less heavy. Taya stood at the window, hands resting on the sill. Her braid hung down her back. The sleeves of Gideon's shirt were rolled halfway, and her feet were tucked into his old boots, laced loose around her ankles. She didn't look out with fear now, just watchfulness. Calm, the kind that grows after hard weather's passed. Behind her, Gideon sat at the table working on a leather strap, part of a saddle harness he'd nearly forgotten about until this morning. His hand was still bandaged from the cut, but she'd changed the wrapping that morning without asking. He didn't stop her. She turned. "They'll come soon." He didn't need to ask who. Whoever had owned her before. Whoever thought they still did. Men like that always came eventually, if not for the woman, then for the power they thought they lost. He met her eyes. "I know. You don't have to get involved," she said. "I already did." She watched him another long moment, then stepped forward. She placed both hands flat on the table, not far from his. "I didn't ask you to save me. I didn't ask you to stay." They sat in that space between responsibility and belonging, and neither moved. Finally, she said, "Do you want me gone?" He didn't look away. "No, even if trouble follows." His jaw clenched, not from doubt, from certainty. "I've lived alone long enough," he said. Let trouble come. She nodded once. Steady. Small. Then sat down across from him. You sure about this? She asked. He didn't answer right away. He stood instead, walked to the shelf, opened a small wooden box she'd never seen him touch. Inside was something small, smooth, and worn. He took it out and placed it on the table. It was a ring. Simple, silver, dulled from age. It was hers, he said. My wife's. Taya looked at it, then at him. He didn't push it toward her. Didn't ask anything. I kept it because I didn't know what else to do with it, he said. But it's just metal now. What matters is what we choose. She picked it up gently, studied it, then laid it down again. I don't need that, she said. He nodded. I know. I just need space to work, to stand, to be. You have that. In a place that's mine. Not borrowed. He looked around the cabin. It's ours now, he said. That evening, they worked side by side. She swept the floor. He fixed the shelf she had said leaned too far. They made stew again, but this time she added a pinch of something different, dry sage and pine ash. He didn't ask what it was, just said it tasted better. They ate together, no gap between their bowls. And that night, when they lay down, she didn't stay to one side. Her head rested against his shoulder. One hand rested over his. The fire burned low. Outside, the snow kept melting. Inside, nothing more needed to be said. She stayed, and so did he. Not because either had to, but because they chose to, together. It was the sound of water running that marked the change. The creek behind the cabin, buried under ice all winter, had broken open. Melted snow from the ridge flowed down in steady rhythm now, cutting through the dead brush like it remembered where it had once been. Birds returned in pairs. Trees shifted in the wind again. The mountain had softened. Gideon stood on the porch sharpening a tool edge against the whetstone, slow, even strokes. He didn't hurry these days. Not because there wasn't work. There always was, but because the weight that used to sit on his chest no longer pushed him to outrun it. Taya knelt in the small patch of cleared earth near the fence, pressing seeds into the thawed soil. She didn't speak while she worked, didn't hum or talk to herself like some did. Her focus was quiet, intent. The sleeves of her shirt were rolled high. Her fingers were dirty, her back straight. They had decided, without saying it, to stay. Not just until the next storm, not just until she felt safe, but for good. They shared the chores now without thinking. He hunted, she dried the meat. She cooked, he cleaned the tools. When his leg hurt, she rubbed salve into the joint at night without asking. When her silence stretched too long, he left fresh coffee waiting near the fire before she woke. One morning, she moved the bedroll from the floor and rolled it up for good. Another day, she hung her repaired dress near the window. Not because she meant to leave, but because she no longer needed to wear it every day. She had clothes that fit now. She had boots. She had a place for her own things. And one evening, just after supper, she placed a small carved figure on the mantel. It was nothing elaborate, just a horse, made from cedar scrap with a soft curve in the neck. She didn't explain it. Gideon didn't ask. But later that night, he touched it once before bed. Weeks passed. No one came looking for her. And if they ever did, they'd find a man and woman living side by side, working in rhythm, speaking little, moving with purpose. No rescue to be made, no one to reclaim. One late afternoon, as the light dipped behind the ridge and gold streaked across the snowmelt pools, they stood near the edge of the field, quiet. I might plant squash there, she said, pointing with her chin toward the clearing near the shed. Gideon looked, then nodded. I'll help dig it out. You dig crooked. You fix straight. She smirked, just faint, but real. He watched her turn her face toward the sun. Her hair had grown thicker again. Her skin, still weather-worn, had color now. Not just survival, but life. He reached out then, slow, sure, and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. Her breath caught. She turned to him. They stood close. Then she leaned in, and he didn't hesitate. Their foreheads touched first, then lips. It wasn't urgent. It wasn't claimed. It was chosen, like everything between them. That night, they lay in the same bed, bodies curved together, hands resting over ribs, breath sinking slow. I never asked, he murmured, voice low against her hair. What would you have done if I hadn't opened that door? She didn't answer for a long time. Then, I would have died there. He nodded once, eyes closed. She added, but not because you owed me anything. Just because I had nowhere else to go. He pulled her closer. You have somewhere now. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. By spring, the cabin had a second chair on the porch. The saddle hooks held 2 coats. And beside the fire, her blanket stayed folded, unused, because she had a bed now, because she had a home, because staying, this time, meant belonging. And no one would ever take that from her again.